Hello again, and good evening. Local time for Metro Manila, the Philippines, Southeastern Asia, and a happy and blessed and safe and healthy Easter week to all of you. On December the 13th, 1981, so soon 40 years ago, the Polish people had a rude awakening. At 6 o'clock that morning, regular programs on the television and radio were interrupted by a grim broadcast that lasted maybe 22 minutes, and where Poland's military dictator, the ruling United Workers' Party's general secretary or chairperson, prime minister, and of course, commander-in-chief of the armed forces, General Wojciech Jaruzelski, proclaimed the imposition of a state of siege or martial law. He claimed that it was necessary in order to save the Polish economy from collapsing. Later, he claimed that it was necessary to prevent Poland from suffering Czechoslovakia's fate in 1968. In other words, occupation by almost all of the other members of the Soviet-led military alliance, the Warsaw Pact. His motives have been debated, but one of his key motives definitely was to crush the pro-democracy Solidarity trade union movement, which had ironically been recognized as an independent trade union movement by the government over 1 year earlier, in August 1980. However, its growing influence over Poland at its height, it had 10 at the time, or in the 1980s. And then he wanted to prop up the communist government and stimulate the Polish economy again, but because Poland had basically a Soviet-style command economy, this was difficult. The shortages of even basic products such as bread, milk, and other dairy products and meat became notorious. One of the reasons was that a part of the nation's produce was shipped eastward to the Soviet Union. This, of course, was not unique to Poland. There were several other Eastern Bloc countries where this happened, and probably here in Asia, some produce from the poorer communist countries may have been transported to the People's Republic of China. So let's read a summary of the English language Wikipedia article on the martial law in Poland. It was finally lifted over 1.5 years later on July the 22nd, 1983. It had been suspended on December 31st, 1982. Thousands of opposition activists were imprisoned without charge, and up to 91, according to this Wikipedia article, were killed. Many political prisoners were not released until a general amnesty in 1986. Since the 1970s, communist Poland had been in a deep economic recession. The first secretary of the Polish United Workers' Party, in effect the Communist Party, Edward Gierek, had gambled on making Poland look like a good communist and socialist dictatorship, an attractive country to invest in. And he had been able to persuade various Western countries to lend a lot of money to Poland. So temporarily, the economic output increased, but by the late 1970s, even it began to fall. Essential goods were being heavily rationed, and that few of the pro-democracy opposition, including the Solidarity Trade Alliance. Gierek was dismissed in late 1980 and confined to house arrest. The Soviet hardliners feared that the Poles might overthrow communism and ally themselves with the Western Bloc. They also feared that Poland would be would take itself out of the Council for Mutual Economic Assistance, which was the Communist and Socialist Economic Alliance, and that would bring an end to communist rule in Central Eastern Europe. There were a series of strikes and demonstrations by employers of chief industrial regions, and Poland was threatened by a financial insolvency, bankruptcy. The Military Council of National Salvation was formed by the new first secretary of the Polish United Workers' Party, General Wojciech Jaruzelski. The Polish People's Army Citizens Militia, ZOMO special units, and tanks rode onto the streets of Poland's cities to scare off demonstrators and began regular patrols and maintained curfew. Traveling between the Polish cities was forbidden unless a permit was granted by the authorities. Food shortages became more critical, and censorship was placed again on all mass media and even mail. The secret services wiretapped telephones in public booths and state institutions. However, years ago, I read in a Finnish newspaper or magazine the claim that during the martial law or the 1980s in Poland, there was a voiceover warning, this telephone call is being listened to. If that is true, then at least they had some humane touch amid the brutality. Already on December the 16th, just 3 days earlier, braving frigid temperatures, pro-Solidarity miners organized a strike against the declaration of martial law at the Bujek coal mine in the industrial city of Katowice in southwestern Poland. The ZOMO squads, nicknamed Communist Gestapo by the opposition, brutally pacified Bujek, resulting in 9 miners' deaths. All other demonstrations across Poland were met with an armed force, which utilized water cannons, tear gas, batons, truncheons, and clubs to disperse crowds and beat protesters. Thousands were detained, and some were tortured in state prisons. On the 31st of August 1982, in the copper mining town of Lubin, 3 people were mortally wounded. Already 10 months before the imposition of the martial law in February 1981, the Polish Ministry of National Defense and Ministry of Internal Affairs carried out a training scenario, the purpose of which was to explore how the martial law would be introduced. By March 1981, the situation escalated after the Bydgoszcz events in southwestern Poland, where local Solidarity delegates invited for a regional national council meeting in that city to discuss potential strikes were beaten and abused by the citizens' militia. In July 1981, the Soviets, without notifying the Polish authorities, unexpectedly sent over 600 tanks to Borne Sulinowo, a Polish military base. Over 25,000 posters announcing martial law were secretly printed in the Soviet Union, transported to Poland by airplane, and hidden in the large building housing the Ministry of Internal Affairs. On December the 12th, 1981, shortly before midnight, so just over 6 hours before the start of this somber televised broadcast of the martial law's proclamation, the Polish government or Council of State gathered in Warsaw's Belvedere Palace and approved nationwide martial law. At the same time, the Military Council of National Salvation, VRON or VRONA, is translated as Crow, was founded, and its members were high-ranking generals or military officers of the Polish People's Army. The generals and officers later became known to the public as Evil Crows in relation to the Polish name of the council. At precisely midnight, the motorized reserves of the citizens' militia, or ZOMO, began Akcja Jodła, or Operation Fur in English, and arrested the first members of the Solidarity trade union movement who were at close reach. In total, between 70,000 and 80,000 soldiers of the People's Army and 30,000 functionaries of the Ministry of Internal Affairs were deployed for action. Around 1,750 tanks, 1,900 armored combat vehicles, 500 militarized transport units, 9,000 cars, and several helicopter squadrons were in service. 25% of all units concentrated in the Polish capital, Warsaw, or in the surrounding localities. Preceding Jodła was Akcja Azalea, in English Operation Azalea, which began at around 10:30 p.m. local time on December the 12th. So they stormed the SB Secret Services, paramilitary troops, the militia, ZOMO, and border protection troops, stormed 451 telecommunications exchange facilities and cut telephone lines to allegedly prevent the spread of misinformation. However, the intention was to prevent Solidarity from contacting its branches in other cities to mobilize protesters. Well, back in 1981, these cell phones or mobile phones were very rare, or rather rare even in most Western democracies. I mean, there were a number of car phones and then, of course, radio phones as well. It wouldn't be until the late 1980s and early 1990s that the cell phones would become popular and common in most Western democracies. The Polish radio informed about martial law being imposed at 6 o'clock the following morning and transmitted the speech made by General Jaruzelski. The Polish television network and its chief news program, Dziennik, or Journal, aired the speech in a slightly modified version. Despite the early hour, the declaration was watched by millions of Polish citizens. Braving the wintry weather, on the same day as Wujek was pacified at the cost of several lives, the 30,000 strong demonstration was held in the northern port city of Gdansk. On the night of April the 29th to 30th, 1982, local miners in Wodzisław Śląski, apparently in southwestern Poland, because Śląsk means Silesia, a historical region now located mostly in southwestern Poland, planted a bomb and blew up a monument dedicated to Soviet soldiers who liberated Poland from the Nazis in 1945. From the very beginning of the martial law in December 1981, a strict curfew was imposed from 7 o'clock in the evening until 6 o'clock in the morning. However, it was later adjusted to between 10 o'clock in the evening and 6 o'clock in the morning. Night walks or escapades were forbidden, and street patrols were commonplace. The VRON Military Council sealed off the country's borders, closed all airports, and road access to main cities was restricted. Telephone lines were disconnected, mail was subjected to renewed postal censorship, all independent political organizations were criminalized, and lessons in schools and universities temporarily suspended. The government imposed a 6-day work week on the Polish workers, while the mass media, public services, healthcare services, power stations, coal mines, seaports, railway stations, and most key factories were placed under military management. Thousands of journalists, teachers, and professors were fired. Military courts were established to bypass the normal court system, and in the mass media, the television announcers, if they were men, had to wear military uniforms. If they had no rank because of their failure to complete the military service, then they just wore plain uniforms. And that, according to a Finnish historian specializing in Polish history, Professor Kalervo Hovi, led many Poles to joke in the 1980s, especially the early years of that decade, that the lowest rank in the Polish army was a news journalist. However, the Polish martial law failed to achieve its objectives. Rather, it increased the pro-democracy opposition's resolve to fight against the communist government. No wonder about 700,000 Poles, according to this Wikipedia article, migrated to the Western countries. Most Western democracies strongly condemned the martial law, including all the major ones like the United States. Here is a brief summary of that roughly 22-minute televised and radioed speech by General Wojciech Jaruzelski announcing the martial law. Today I address myself to you as a soldier and as the head of the Polish government. I address you concerning extraordinarily important questions. Our homeland is at the edge of an abyss. The achievements of many generations and the Polish home that has been built up from the dust are about to turn into ruins. State structures are ceasing to function. Each day delivers new blows to the waning economy. The transportation of conflicts, misunderstanding, hatred causes moral degradation, surpasses the limits of toleration. Strikes, the readiness to strike, actions of protest have become a norm of life. Even school youth are being drawn into this. Yesterday evening, many public buildings remained seized. The cries are voiced to physical reprisals with the Reds, in quotation marks, with people who have different opinions. The cases of terror, threats, and moral vendetta or revenge, of even direct violence, are on the rise. A wave of impudent crimes, robberies, and burglaries is running across the country. The underground business sharks' fortunes, already reaching millions, are growing. Chaos and demoralization have reached the magnitude of a catastrophe. People have reached the limit of psychological toleration. Many people are struck by despair. Not only days, but hours as well, are bringing forth the all-national disaster. Citizens, the load of responsibility that falls on me this dramatic moment in the Polish history is huge. It is my duty to take this responsibility concerning the future of Poland that my generation fought for on all the fronts of the war, meaning the Second World War, and for which they sacrificed the best years of their life. I declare that today the Military Council of National Salvation has been formed. In accordance with the Constitution, the State Council has imposed martial law all over the country. The State Council means the cabinet or government. I wish that everyone understood the motives of our actions. The military coup, military dictatorship is not our goal. In longer perspective, none of Poland's problems can be solved with the use of violence. The Military Council of National Salvation does not replace constitutional organs of power. Its only purpose is to keep the legal balance of the country, to create guarantees that give a chance to restore order and discipline. This is the ultimate way to bring the country out of the crisis, to save the country from collapse. I appeal to all the citizens. A time of heavy trials has arrived, and we have to stand those in order to prove that we are worthy of Poland. Before all the Polish people and the whole world, I would like to repeat the immortal words: Poland has not yet perished so long as we still live.